I can understand why people would call Eritrea the North Korea of Africa when you're talking about even just practicing a religious belief inside of your own house could net you in prison. What is their judicial or legal system like? Let's say somebody in some way reports that their neighbor is having a religious get together of some kind. Is there even a court system, or are they dragged off? I mean, are they going before a judge? Are they getting a sentence? Or are some of these people, if not the majority, being just taken to prison with an unknown idea of how long they are going to be there?
So most of the people that I interviewed 42 people, none of them had been to court. From what I understand, if you are accused of a crime such as theft, possibly rape or murder, depending on the circumstances, you might go to court. But if you are arrested for criticizing the government, anything religious, that might go on the basis of, if you're arrested for anything religious that the government doesn't sanction, if you try to leave the country without permission, then you will also be arrested. So none of those people had gone to court. The one guy spoke of one of his cellmates who had tried to leave the country when he was 16 with a group of 10 people, and he met him in an underground prison when the guy had already been in there for 7 years. Imagine putting a 16-year-old in prison underground for 7 years because he wanted to leave the country.
I mean, honestly, I would like to believe I have a pretty wild imagination, but that one exceeds kind of the limits of depravity, of how a human being could treat other human beings. And so when they're put into these prisons and the people that you talk to, was there a sentence associated with that, or they were just going to get out when they got out, when somebody decided to open the door and let them go?
There was no sentence. It seemed to them to be very haphazard. I interviewed one guy who's now a nurse in LA, who was in prison for 5 years. He did not know why he was arrested. And one day somebody came along and saw him in prison and said, "Oh, are you still here?" and let him out. Oh, that was it. They came for him at the hospital that he worked at one day, and took him to prison. And he is now attending a lot of demonstrations against the government in America because of the memory of all those people that he left behind in those prisons. He spoke about one woman, Esther Solomon, who was the wife of a former minister, who was also imprisoned when he called for democratic reforms. After he was arrested, she flew back from the States where she'd been studying because they had young children, and she was arrested at the airport. That was about 20 years ago. She was kept in a cell by herself. And he said, once she managed to hear her daughter's voice on the radio talking about her. The family had managed to escape the United States. And he said she used to cry every night. She'd been there for 20 years. She hadn't seen her children since they were toddlers. So and she has no sentence. Nobody knows how long she'll be there for, if she'll die there. There's a 15-year-old girl who's an American citizen, the daughter of another minister who fled the country, who's a minister of information. She was 15 when she was taken. She's 25 now. Now, be sure to get paid for all that time. But I do understand that she's still alive. And she was arrested immediately after her father fled the country.
Do you have any estimate? I mean, you said you talked to 42 people who had spent time in those prisons. Do you have an estimate of, I guess it would be a two-part question. One would be how many prisons there are, whether overt or covert, and two would be the number of people currently imprisoned.
So I don't have either of those figures. I think anybody who would have those figures would be in the Eritrean government. It's very difficult to track the number of prisons because so many things are used as prisons. There are formal prisons, there's underground prisons, there's shipping containers used as prisons. One prisoner spoke of tunnels being dug into a cliff face and people being put in there. The number of prisoners is constantly changing. Um, so, in terms of the number of prisons, I don't know. I just know that the prisons are full to bursting. Um, many people spoke about this desperate overcrowding and the terrible conditions that they faced as a result of that. So, no idea, to be honest.
Even though I know the answer to the next question is going to be based on what the Eritrean government is saying, which already in our conversation I feel like probably shouldn't be trusted. How do they speak about their own prison system? Is it even a topic that they're willing to address?
So they did not respond to requests for comment on my article. They have routinely denied being involved in any human rights abuses, including in Tigray, and they spent 5 months denying that their troops were even in Tigray, contrary to dozens of witness testimonies and evidence. The Eritrean government doesn't really answer very many questions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it does, but generally their response is that what we do is our business, and we do not commit abuses.
Yeah, it's kind of a boilerplate response for a lot of areas that are doing exactly the opposite of what they're publicly saying. So you're not going to get any information from the Eritrean government. How hard was it for you to start to piece this together and finding people who were willing to talk? It sounds like there's a level of, I guess I would use the word censorship when it comes to the Eritrean government when talking about their prison system. Was it a difficult subject for you to actually develop research and intelligence on, or were people pretty forthright and willing to come forward?
The people who are willing to speak most openly are mostly those who've managed to reach a Western country some time ago. But by and large, people were very reluctant to speak, very reluctant to be named. Only 2 of them said that I could use their names. People who had left most recently were absolutely terrified. They fear for the safety of their family members back in Eritrea. They fear that they might be deported to Eritrea or sent back. I interviewed some people that had managed to escape and then had been captured and sent back. There was these thousands of refugees that were forced to return from Ethiopia. People have been forced back from Sudan. There's terrible people smuggling rings in the Sahel, where I think I'll have to look up the exact number of people, but certainly tens of thousands. I think it might be about 200,000 Eritreans trying to escape have been captured by people smugglers and are trafficked for their organs. They are kept in sort of makeshift prisons and tortured, and videos of that torture is sent to their relatives abroad in order to extract ransoms from them. Some of them have been forced to join Islamic State as fighters. So the fact that people are willing to risk terrible torture and death to escape from their homeland is, I think, pretty revealing of the state of affairs there.
Yeah. Looking at the risks in front of them, obviously the motivation behind them has to be something that is pretty robust for them to kind of walk through that wall of fire.